Hi YouTube, it's Viv. I'm just coming on here to share a little bit about my experience, like lived experience, what I've seen, and why I decided to become a trans rights activist. So we can always start with the obvious, which is that I try to respect all people, regardless of, race, religion, gender, etc. When I was in about eighth grade middle school, I started to learn more about trans people, and I'd also noticed that there was quite a bit of serious homophobia and transphobia in the area where I lived. For example, when I was in even elementary school, and keep in mind we're talking 2000s here, it's not like 2020, people were using gay as an insult. They were using FAG. This is elementary school, by the way, and kids were already introducing those words into my mind vocabulary. I was already hearing people get called FAG, hearing people get called DYKE, and I was hearing all of these slurs, and I was only like 10 years old, taking the bus to school. So I had to deal with some definitely internalized homophobia and transphobia when I was in middle school, but it really took a process of doing some research and finding out, hey, what is a transgender person? What is gender? Learning more about it at a young age. I was only really 13 when I started doing some serious research, and it was also very uncommon for somebody my age to do research on gender, especially we're talking well over, well, close to 10 years ago. Um, and I started realizing the difference between gender and sex, and it was also right one time I started high school that I actually wound up dating someone who I at first did not realize, but later found out was a non binary, gender, transmasculine, AFAB individual, that I really started taking their identity very seriously, um, in a quest to not only educate myself more, further my understanding of gender, further my understanding of them. I also was getting a lot of negative treatment when I dated this individual, and it was a real slap in the face because I'd already seen homophobia and stuff, but I had mostly kept my sexual orientation to myself up until that point. But it was very frustrating dating them. Not nothing to do with them, not their fault at all, but just it was very frustrating dealing with people saying comments like you're dating an F slur, or you're dating a D slur, or you're dating a T slur. And because also keep in the mind at the time I was choosing to present more femininely, just, to deal with the harsh reality of high school kids. And really, all that situation hit its peak when I was walking home from school because I, early high school didn't have a car, didn't wasn't able to have a license. Walking home from school, and these kids surround me, and they start throwing crap at me and yelling slurs at me, and just it was a really tough situation, and I felt very threatened and in serious danger, and I had never ever felt really, I mean, yeah, you got the person making this comment here and there, but I had never felt so openly attacked for just dating someone. It wasn't anyone's business to date, having a relationship, holding hands, just being visible, and then getting that level of negativity for dating a trans person. So a lot of that experience was completely new to me, and it was really that experience that made me become a trans rights activist. This was 2014, and I decided then, I was like, you know what? We need to be aware of non-binary people. We need to understand gender more as a society. We need to erase the stigma of just somebody existing or somebody being in a relationship and then getting hate and being scared to go to school. I'm just like, all of those feelings, all of those things are not okay. And this was a very big turning point for me. It was also around that time that I had come to understand my own gender identity more, and personally, I had begun to understand at that time that I truly was non binary. But also, I was once again still very closeted to the point where I wouldn't share that information outside of my partner, outside of, you know, my family, who once again, they just totally dismissed it. Um, but I had begun having that understanding of myself at that young age. So fast forward, and you know, throughout high school, I just did my part to try and raise awareness. I was treasurer of GSA, I was vice president of GSA. I always tried to educate about different sexual orientations, different gender identities, and always further that inclusion and diversity message at any point that I could, because I know that any time that someone breaks a perceived gender norm, there is going to be massive backlash. And I had already experienced it, and I also I've taken quite a few women's studies courses at my university. That's not my major, but that's something that I plan on achieving a minor in. And women's and gender studies classes also further my understanding of gender, um, that I had already been going off of based on personal life experience. Um, but one thing that was very interesting, that I kind of brought up in one of my classes is we do not like any person we perceive to be female, AFAB, whatever. We do not like seeing masculinity in those people. And we do not like it because it goes against emphasized femininity. It goes, those people are directly breaking norms, and they're going as far as to, do things that are still slightly taboo, such as having extremely short hair or being more muscular, not presenting, breasts, just doing things that make people offended because it goes so far from a deviation from the perceived image of as they're seeing women. But as we know, AFAB people are all types of gender identities and are not necessarily women just because they're AFAB. But a lot of people, once again, don't understand that. It's beyond their comprehension. So any of that extreme deviation, and the more you deviate from the AFAB cisgender woman norm, the more you deviate as an AFAB person, the worse you will be treated. And I have consistently seen in my life that that is true, and that is also true. The reverse is also true, I've noticed, for AMAB individuals who present themselves farther and farther from the cisgender AMAB norm. So I have noticed that is true as well for them. But really, erasing the stigma around a person of a certain biology presenting in a way that is atypical of society's perception for what they perceive as that person's gender, which is usually not even accurate, just results in such a harsh treatment. And also, when I was in college, I made friends with a trans woman, actually quite a few, but one person who I wound up going to lunch with in a city near me. And one of the moments also that really made me want to take trans rights farther was I'm having lunch, and this guy, gets up and has hot water that he asked the waiter for at a table next to us and splashes it on my friend, who thankfully today is totally fine, but at the time had some mild burns on her face. So, like, that moment and being there in that moment, seeing that, just the pain, the sadness, the hatred, that really also fueled my belief that we need to take trans rights seriously, that people are being hurt by your ignorance, that you having this idea that people aren't real, that's not just, suicide risk. Excuse me for mentioning suicide, I should have said TW, my bad. But it's not just a suicide risk, it's also a risk of hate crime, a risk of injury for those people, and that's just not okay. And it's nobody should ever have to live in fear. That's just the baseline number one thing that I always believe, is you should not have to live in fear for whatever you identify as. Your race, you shouldn't live in fear for your race. You shouldn't have to live in fear of your religion. You shouldn't have to live in fear for, your gender. And it's that last thing that I mean, all of these things we have so many arguments on, but at the end of the day, like, the real stuff, the death stats, the horrible treatment of trans people, there is no excuse for it whatsoever. And that was a huge slap in the face moment for me as well, especially as a closeted person who generally passes as a masculine cis woman, is how people see me. Um, just seeing a trans woman get treated like that in public was a total just game changer. And also, other times I've gone out with one of my close friends who is a non binary individual who is AMAB but extremely femininely presenting. And just seeing how she gets harassed in public, seeing what people say, the yelling out from a car, the yelling F slur, the yelling T slur that has happened when we go into the city, just the horrible treatment. Um, just the level of transphobia has also seriously affected my life, because it's like you're literally shortening people's lifespans by being that hateful. People, and not just suicide, other things, the stress of transphobia, I assume it's similar. Of course, we don't have that much research on trans people, but I assume that the stress of transphobia is similar in a way to the stress of racism, in that the stress of racism literally causes black people to live shorter lives. So middle class black people live shorter lives than middle class white people. They've controlled for health, they've controlled for obesity, they've controlled for chronic illness, they've done all these controls, and still the literal stress of racism alone, um, even across similar social class, you have middle class black people living shorter lives than poor white people on average, and that's just unacceptable. And I feel that trans people, it is similar, where you have trans people who live shorter lives simply because of the societal stress of being transgender and existing openly in space, and the stress of that literally leads people to live shorter lives. And if there's one thing also that I care about very deeply, it is life, because you cannot get life back. Once life ends, you cannot get that back. And to have people live 7 years shorter just for being black, have to possibly, we don't know because there's not much research, which is messed up, but the fact that we have people who live probably much shorter lives because they're transgender, that upsets me. You are like, people's lives, that value of life is, there's nothing more valuable in this world, on this earth, than the value of human life. And the fact that people live shorter lives, it's incomprehensible. If you had people who are not trans, you had cisgender people, for example, white people, and we just couldn't figure out why, the stress of being white was causing them to live 7 years shorter, we would get on that immediately. And it's just something that I deeply am passionate about. And the only way for me to increase the knowledge of others and decrease the ignorance is to be an activist. And so that is part of the reason why I take it so seriously. Trans people, their lives are valuable to me. Their lives mean a lot to me. Their happiness, their health, that means a lot to me. Their value as human beings means a lot to me. I care a lot about trans people. I I don't want to live in a world without them. And um yeah, I hope this enlightens you on as to why I care, um, why I choose to be open about it, um, just why I feel like other people matter to me. All right, have a nice day. Thank you.